right. Good morning.
Good morning, Bill.
Sunshine.
Where have you been, brother?
Yeah, man, we we have been MIA. MIA. Um, it's been a busy month, um, and it went by in a flash, but yet it feels like it took forever. Um, so we're raring to get back going here, get some things down on recording, just so we can capture it. Um, I think I looked at the how many people actually looked at the priesthood. It was pretty low. So it's really
Uh,
not a subject, until you understand
yeah,
what the heck I'm talking about. You kind of
yeah,
think, you kind of look at it like, priesthood. That sounds kind of stupid. But
yeah.
if you stick with it, though, it's real beneficial. Um,
Absolutely.
what's that?
Yeah, I said absolutely
Oh,
beneficial.
oh yeah, yeah. Uh, priesthood part one had 6 views, and we dwindled that down to two on the part two.
Heck yeah.
Heck
So
yeah.
you're telling me that getting up at 5:30 to only start recording at 6 for two people is worth it?
Absolutely worth it. In fact, it's more than what we need.
Amen.
it's it's one more than what we
What a
need.
what a truth. What a truth. What a
And
truth
you have to listen to
embedded
the
in
other.
the sand.
You have to listen to the other conversation and understand what the heck I just said. That's hilarious.
Yeah,
How can you
yeah.
lose, man? How can you lose?
I mean, unless you're just out in the remotest places of a jungle and you're by yourself and nobody around you,
Hey, if God put you there, that is the best
somebody's
place to
coming.
be.
That's right.
Absolutely. All right. So the first two sessions, we basically covered the why. Okay. So it took us 3 hours to discuss why we should even be interested. Is it valid to be interested? Um, yesterday I was telling you about. We did the Bible study that I do on Tuesdays, and I mentioned the kings and priests, and I said that we're described as kings and priests forever, forever, but we know nothing about them. I mean, we
Mm,
know some things about them, we know some history about them, but we don't know the intricacies of them. We don't understand the details. We don't understand how to apply it as a believer. And that's really what this is all about. How do we as a believer, use the priesthood in everyday life of a believer? So,
yeah.
and we have to talk about these things, and it gets really really detailed, and it gets really really confusing in some ways, and it's just because it's not part of our culture. Our culture has no connection to anything like this.
Yeah.
But you go to some places like, um, where was it? Was it Hmong or Vietnam? Even India has some connection to it because they do actually do sacrifices. They actually sacrifice animals, so they have a little bit. They can actually connect to it a little bit easier because they
Mm,
have some connection
yeah.
physically to it. Um, but man, in America, if we started sacrificing animals, we'd be in jail so fast.
Pete'd be knocking
Yeah,
on our doors, sending us
protesting
letters,
us. You know.
hate mail.
Yeah, yeah, all that exciting, cool stuff. Um, but but it
So,
does bring, it can bring, does bring focus, you know, to a believer's life. Um, and I got my wrong set of notes. So
yeah, I'm just sitting here going back over what I took, the notes I took.
here we go. Yeah, let me get my
Yeah.
second set of notes. Yeah. What are you laughing about? My organizational skills.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's funny, isn't
I forgot my pen.
it?
I'm gonna go get it.
Okay, all right. I'll wax
You
eloquent
just
while you're
talk.
leaving, while you're gone.
Here you go.
Um, yeah. So, uh, g- keep going, keep rocking. Now I can talk about Derek while he's gone. Um, he can't defend himself. Um, so if you've been listening to this, it's really important that you understand um, the implications of it. Don't just you know think I'm trying to recreate the Catholic model, because I'm not. I'm not trying to tell you that we're Catholic. So
How'd that go talking to yourself?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I realize it's hard for me to wax eloquent anytime.
So, I'm looking back over what we covered, the last time, which seems like 2 years.
Yeah, been a while.
Um, yeah, and um, I had a question
Mm-hmm.
that I found. Now I'm looking for it. Um, where's it at? God, it was about disciple making, and where is it? I just saw it right before I left. Uh, how has the offerings impacted your disciple making?
Mm. Well, it
And I think you answered that. I think I asked you the question and you answered that.
did I?
I thought so.
Well, I don't mind repeating things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to repeat the same message I did before. I'm like, you better. They didn't hear it. They didn't hear it anyway. You better repeat it.
Don't tempt me. Don't test me. I'll throw the same one out there week after week.
It's hilarious. But it has impacted because it really shows you the relationship between uh, and the benefit of disciple and discipler. Of you know that this two-way street, just like the offerer and the priesthood. The offerer is benefiting himself, but he's also benefiting the priest, and vice versa. He's benefiting himself, but he's also benefiting the offerer. They need each other. They can't get to where they need to be without each other. The offerer can't be reconciled to God without the priest, and the priest can't survive without the offerer, and he can't fulfill his destiny without the offerer. So they are symbiotic in that way, and they rely on one another. And that's where Jesus says, "Serve you one another." That's the only system where that's true, where you can both be serving at the same time without somebody sitting back like in a lounge chair while somebody else massages your feet.
Mm, mm.
You so discipling, uh, that is the same idea. you know, a lot of people say, "Well, I'm going to disciple somebody," and you think, "Well, I'm going to give them what they need," and without realizing you need it just as much as they do. So the
Yeah.
discipler grows and develops and matures just as much as, if not more, than the discipled.
Well, and that kind of goes back to the responsibility of the priest compared to the responsibility of the offer.
Right,
Both have responsibilities,
right,
but the responsibility of the priest is a little higher because of the representation that he
yeah,
is, right. So he's representing what he's seeing in that holy place, but he's also representing what he's seeing from that offer to the Father. Like he's the mediator between the offerer
right,
and the Father,
yeah,
and he's also vice versa, the mediator of the Father to the offerer.
yeah, yeah. He's the go-between, and it's
Yeah.
not that God. A lot of people don't like that. Like, I remember one guy got mad at me when I was teaching this, and he was like, "I don't need a priest. I don't need a priest to come to God." And I said, "I didn't say you needed a priest necessarily to come to God. It's just that God has set it up to where we need to interact with one another in this to get to certain levels of understanding, growth, right? And you cannot become what you need to become as a believer. You cannot become an image of Christ without each other. We have to have each other. That's the point. It's not that you know it's not a requirement, but it's a necessity that we interact with one another. So God has rigged it to where you cannot develop into a full person of Christ without your brothers and sisters. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I hope I'm saying that right.
Well, I keep hearing Herb because I've listened recently. You cannot become what you do not behold.
Right. And
You,
but it's like Joshua would never become Joshua without Moses, right? Okay, you got to have that. Um, think of other duos in Scripture.
everywhere.
It God uses, and they couldn't get to where they needed to be without the other, right? So that's the way the priesthood is. It's not that God's like, oh, you got to follow the rules, and you got to designate a priesthood, and that's another thing. I don't want to create some hierarchy system where everybody has to follow no, 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 no. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this is going to be unofficial necessarily, but it's going to be with these ideas in mind. Um,
So here's a good way. Here, like me, just uh, dumbing it down. Uh, can you explain this to me like I'm five, Michael Scott? Um, so partner with God, and then partner with others,
yeah.
and in the so that's one thing that I think is amazing about the Levitical system with the priesthood and even with the kings is the partnering
Yeah.
intention.
Right.
Like God's wanting the king to partner with him so that ultimately the king would bring the partnership to the people that there would be and it's not that it has to always be cohesive like hand in a glove,
Mm-hmm.
but the intention is we partner around the truth about who God is, what God said, and then as we partner with God in the truth, then there's the opportunity that we're an open. The menorah is actually showing up when the priest comes to the offerer as the offerer is coming with the intention to bring a sacrifice
Mm-hmm.
of whatever God's put on his heart, right? So we're a representation of what we see in that holy place
Mm-hmm.
as does that make sense where
Yeah.
it's as the partnering.
And you're helping me to explain it in a better way, I believe, and that is you're going to interact with one another anyway. Okay, we're going to rub up against each other anyhow. My point is, why not be educated on how to do that?
There you go.
So that's what this is. It's not that I'm telling you this is how you must do it. It's no. Okay, you're going to interact with one another anyway. Be armed, be skilled, be ready, be prepared for when you do rub up against each other. You know what the heck you're doing, right? It gives you direction. Uh, gives you points of action that God has laid out and work, and it's steps. Just like, um, man, how many times have you heard? They call it an altar call. We use the terms, an altar call, and people think, well, I just need to go down and lay myself on the altar. Okay, that is not a bad thing. That's not bad, but it's out of step. You know, there's you can't imagine somebody bringing an offering to the tabernacle and they just take that sucker and just throw him on the altar. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a process.
Zero intention.
Yeah,
Yeah.
number one, he ain't going to stay there. Okay, because heat and flesh don't live flesh especially doesn't like it. It's allergic to heat at those
Yeah.
temperatures, and you know you throw a lamb, a bull, goat, a pigeon. I mean, they're going to come away with some checkerboard, marks on them, right? But they're not going to stay, right? So, and we wonder why. Why do I have this roller coaster? Why do I have this roller coaster lifestyle of a believer? I go down and I throw myself on the altar. Yeah, you're alive, and you throw yourself on the altar, and the heat turns up, and you go, whoa,
I didn't ask for this.
oops, 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 oops.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, we understand what we're saying. Somebody listening may be going, "Well, you sound like you're talking in circles and rambling."
Well, and then it goes back to the question, why, and maybe we throw away discipleship,
Mm-hmm.
but we've got to make, because it is about impacting world impactors
Mm-hmm.
in disciple making. But how has this been important to our relationships with other people
Yeah.
since we found out this information?
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying, what I've had in my notes is that this process teaches us how to partner with God in the right way.
Right.
Not that we've got to go through the laws and the Levitical
No.
system to make it happen, but again, so it's beautifully fleshed out when Jesus shows up.
Oh yeah.
It's the flesh and blood take on the representation of a walking priest and a walking king and a walking rabbi
Yeah.
that actually operates the way God had always
Right.
intended for his creation to
Right.
operate.
And
You
it's just just like when you say rabbi and student, rabbi and disciple, then you know what those roles kind of mean, right? And they give you a pattern of how to act, right? Well, the kings and the priests do the same thing. So the priesthood is just a way to deal with people that are wanting to sacrifice or to uh, offer a gift back to God. Okay, that's a really good way to say it. I don't think I've ever said it like
Yep.
that.
Say it again.
So the priesthood is a way as we interact with one another. When we interact with somebody who has a heart to offer a sacrifice or gift back to God. Okay, so when you meet somebody, and you've met those people, we've all met those people where God has just tapped them, and they either want to get more of God, they want to give back to God by benefiting the other believers, or God has tapped them with, hey, you're in heavy debt, and you need to, you're in a bad way, and you need some way to pay the debt, or pay your debt to me.
Well, in saying that, it also can go back to this is where it gets a little hairy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you also see what needs to be done.
Yeah.
Like we've talked about
Yeah.
just earlier, a certain person, and you when you take on the role of this kind of biblical leadership,
Mm-hmm.
you don't just look in and get to hear what the offerer's desire is. You also get to hear from the Father of what you might be able to be a part of to
Mm-hmm.
help them overcome a certain situation,
Yeah.
a certain personality
Mm-hmm.
conflict, a
Yeah.
certain, so you're it's actually you're you're like Jesus
Yeah.
in this situation. You're hearing what the Father's saying, but you're also representing and trying to help represent best what the offerer is intending
Yeah.
to do with their life, with their whatever they're bringing. Again, it goes back to it is the mediator role.
Hmm. And just like king, priest, disciple, their positions, Christ positions, right? And
Yeah.
one thing, not one thing, but I gotta really watch how I'm saying things because we just roll these stupid cliches off our tongue. But uh, I've noticed, and I think it irritates me how emotional we've made um, being a believer. You know, and what this does for me is it takes the emotion out of it. Okay, doesn't matter how you feel that day.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. If you're encouraged or not. Doesn't matter if you're depressed. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You got a job, and here's the job. Do the job or don't do the job. It's just like today. You know, a lot of people's going to go to work. I'm going to go to work. Doesn't matter how I feel about it. You just go
Yeah.
to work. So that's what I really like about these ideas is it takes that emotion completely out. Well, I just don't feel led. Well, great. Get to work.
Yeah.
Okay, how you feel?
Your feelings don't matter.
Feelings
Check
are
them at
irrelevant.
the door.
And that's why I come across so coarse, I think. You know? Why I come across as such a jerk. Is because, don't you know how I felt when you said that? I don't care.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant how you feel. It's like somebody, it may be more relevant with Gen Z though. Right now is like a boss comes in and tells you, you know, hey, I need this done, that done, this done, that done, this done to get to work. And the guy, you don't know how that made me feel. Why can't you talk to me nicely and give me a latte?
Well,
It's
and
irrelevant, huh?
you bring up a good point that reminds me of something that happened last week. So I did another funeral.
Hmm.
Done 14 in 14
Are
months,
you,
man.
you're not producing these funerals on your own, are you?
You'd think I'd have blood all over my hands.
My God,
Um, and
that's terrible.
yeah, 3 in 2 months. So it's just becoming. It's like I thought this year would change. Of course, you think going into a new year changes everything. It doesn't. But so by the end of the week, because I did the funeral on Saturday, and it was a hell of a week. It was a crazy week,
Mm.
and I did the funeral on Saturday, and I know nobody from the church is going to be listening right now, and when they listen later, they'll probably understand it. But by the end of that day, we started. I was at church at about 8:45, 9 o'clock on Saturday. Got home about 2, and so we fed the family. By the end of the day, and within 10 minutes of me finishing the funeral, going to the graveside, and coming back, I had 2 people tell me about 2 other people that were either sick or dying. I didn't give 3 scoops of monkey crap. I did not care. And I acted like it because it was like I had assumed the role of the mediator for the family in the tragic death. It was a tragic death. I had assumed that role for basically 4 days, 5 days of reaching out, being in the hospital, and dude, I was spent.
Yeah,
Like any emotional attachment I had to anything in my life at that time, it was gone.
yeah,
And it was there even on Saturday, but I had to kind of just assume the role.
yeah,
I had to assume the role.
yeah,
But by the end of the day, I was like, don't tell me anything else wrong with anybody else because I don't want to hear it. I'm sick and tired of people dying. I'm sick and tired of always hearing about people getting sick. But it goes back to
yeah,
prove the point that whether, and I know most people aren't a pastor that's listening to this, but it doesn't matter where you're at in life. It doesn't matter where you're at in life. If your emotions are driving you,
Mm,
you will not be the priest or the representative that the world or that God needs you to be to the world.
yeah,
It's impossible
yeah,
because your emotions are going to do, they're going to do this.
yeah, yeah,
So the assuming the role at the beginning is what's key,
yeah,
not assuming the role, being or receiving the role.
yeah. Some people don't want to touch it. Some people are hands off. As soon as you say priesthood, a believer,
Yeah,
they just shut down. They don't want to hear it, and they don't care what you got to say. They don't care how biblical it is, or if even if it is, they're not even willing to investigate whether it is, and that's fine. I mean, you don't have to report to me. This ain't my deal. I'm not.
yeah,
I'm just reading the manual. I'm just, don't get mad at me when how a machine works. I'm just reading the manual. So, you know, well,
amen.
why does it do that? Well, why we got to do it that way? Well, how come you got to take that off before you take that off? I don't want to understand that. I don't. Why is that manual written so weird? Look, I didn't write it. I'm just reading it. Okay,
That's right.
that's right. All right. So, if if we had cool graphics, which we don't, um, I'd put up a picture of the tabernacle in the wilderness. Now, what's the difference between? Maybe we need to talk about that because we need to talk about where the priest works, where his job takes place. All right, and that is in the tabernacle. That's where his original. That was the original idea by God. Okay, so uh, if you have experience with the tabernacle, fantastic. You're way ahead of the game. If you have no understanding of the tabernacle, you got a lot to learn, and you need to really study it. Okay, don't bypass the tabernacle, because if you bypass the tabernacle, you're going to lose a lot of understanding. And once we get into the procedure and the offerings, you're going to be lost, and it's going to be impossible for you to do your job. It's just whenever you start a new job, they always give you a tour of the facility wherever you're going to be working, right? Even if you're working from home, they're going to be, there's going to be things they need to orient you to. Where's your resources? Where's your tools? Where's this? Where's that? This is what you do in case of emergency. When on fire, fall here. You know, stuff,
Yeah,
stuff like that. So it's very important to understand the tabernacle. And there's a big difference between the tabernacle and the temple. All right, huge difference. Uh, Same layout, but very different. Very very different. So one of the advantages of the tabernacle in the wilderness was it was designed to be mobile. It was designed to move. It was designed to go where the people went. Um, so that's a big theme, right? God wants to be with you. God wants to go where you go. That's why I like the tabernacle better, just
yeah,
because of what it represents. Um, the temple's not bad. It's not what God intended. God never asked for that. That was definitely a man's idea. Um, just like the temple of Jesus's time, Herod's temple, which was basically Zerubbabel's temple, you know, with a facelift. Um, but when you look at that, it was big, it was tall, it was huge, right? The tabernacle wilderness wasn't. It was just a tent, and the temple, um, was influenced by the belief system of that day, which Egypt subscribed to it, which meant that if your God was grand, or if you wanted to show the grand nature of your God, you built huge doors, you know, with high, what do you call that? It's not
cathedral.
threshold, huh?
cathedral.
Yeah, but like the top of the door. What's the top of the door called?
Oh, the the
Yeah, it just left me. But they would, um, it's lift. There's a lot of language in the Old Testament of lift up, basically lift up the height of the doors because your God's coming in. So in Egypt they have a lot of big doors in their temples and in their monuments because it's to show how big their ideas of their gods, right? So that was they kind of adopted that a little bit in the temple, uh,
yeah.
where they made it huge, tall. It was like incredibly high. So you know when Satan took Jesus to the pinnacle of the temple, you know, yeah, yeah. If you'd have jumped off that, you would have made a greasy spot on the pavement because that it was high, right?
Yeah.
There,
Yeah.
you would have been recognized, and there's no walking away from that one. Um, so so the temple was definitely more influenced by man's ideas and thoughts than what God intended, right?
Yeah.
But it was on the same pattern though. Um,
With the same
so,
intention. With
huh?
the same intention. The
Yes,
same
yeah,
intention.
same intention. So, what is the
With the
tabernacle?
exception of mobile. With
Yeah,
the exception of,
right.
but it almost seems like, I'll add this in, it almost seems like with the temple, God is allowing man to again play himself into the history of building their own thing.
Yes.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
that's all the way back to the kings, and then you've got this idea of the temple is a set place in the capital city, which is Jerusalem, and that's of course where the Taj Mahal, that's the Tower of Babel, that's the man's representation of God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Right.
God allows us to do that. But as the tabernacle is more simplistic,
Yeah.
it's more nomadic, it's more of a better representation,
More relatable. You
more
know,
relatable. Yeah,
it
yeah,
definitely is. Um, and God doesn't want to be. So, bad things happen when you erect monuments from your own ideas, right? Because then
absolutely.
it's just like uh, the serpent when the serpents were biting the children of Israel in the wilderness, right? And Moses took that brass serpent and put it on a pole, saved people, right? But it was physical. It was a physical representation. So what wound up happening was, hundreds of years later, they're worshiping that stinking thing, right? And one of the kings has to take it and destroy it because they've abused it. So anything that we create physically, man, it just it's something that's permanent like that. We it tends to sour over time. Um, that just tells you just how it's just what it is, right? Um, so this place, the tabernacle. So we're going to use the tabernacle versus the temple. I'm not opposed to the temple. I don't hate the temple. So if you want to use the temple, I just don't care. Okay, use the temple. But I like the tabernacle, just personal preference. Um, but the picture is at least threefold. Okay, there's three pictures combined in one thing when you talk about the tabernacle. Okay, it is a picture. Number one, it's a picture of heaven. It's exactly how heaven's set up. Um, and if you go to the book of Revelation and you look at what John's describing when he goes up into heaven, he describes there's an altar. That's where the martyrs are under the altar, right? There's a sea, which would be the laver, and then you have God's throne, which would be the Holy of Holies, and everything else is in between there, right? So, um, you have the door. Number one, the door in heaven. So he's walking through the gate, or the opening of the tent to go in. So and then he begins to see these things, and they're laid out exactly like the tabernacle. So number one, and in fact, I think Moses, I can't think of the passage, but it actually, um, God says, a pattern, come and see a pattern, I'll show you a pattern. And basically lays it out for him and shows him what's a picture of heaven, right? So that's number one. And the idea of that is that when you are in the physical tabernacle, God's viewing you as if you're in his presence, or if you are in heaven already. So it's it's a great picture of that. Okay. But everything in the tabernacle, everything about the tabernacle speaks of Jesus the Christ. So it's a picture or metaphor, example, and what it is you can look at the details of it, look into it, and you can line it up beside Jesus the Christ, and you can see similarities, and you can see qualities that you normally wouldn't see otherwise, right? One of the basic things, it's, you know, if you looked at it, it would have looked like any other tent. Okay, it would look bigger, maybe. I'm sure there were some big tents out there. So this tent was bordered with, you know, with linen border, with posts, and you know, you know, all kinds of detail. I could go into it, but it's not relevant for right now. Um, there's books that have been written on just the tabernacle, so go read some. Um, so so when you look at the tent, it just looks like any other tent, and you wouldn't necessarily think there's anything special in there. But if you went inside, you would see all kinds of detailed and gold, and different colors, and just spectacular, you know, inside, which is speaks of Jesus, right? If you looked at him, he looked like any other dude. He wouldn't look like anything special. But if you looked on the inside, who he was, what he was about, where he came from, it would have been spectacular. So there's kind of some, just gives you an idea of um, why it's important to study the tabernacle, because it's a picture of heaven, it's a picture of Jesus the Christ. But the third example is it's a picture of us. It's also who we are. So all the components that are in the tabernacle are present in us as well. So just like if we look at each other and there's nothing special, we're not particularly impressed by each other, but inside is glorious, incredibly glorious,
Well, and
especially where God resides. Huh?
that trinity of body, soul, and spirit,
Yeah.
which is also seen of the outer courts, and then the soul and the inner courts,
Right.
and then the spirit in the holy of holies. I know we've talked about that too, but
Right.
that's like the innards
Yes.
of of man,
Right.
where the tabernacle is the picture of the flesh because of what it's made out of, what
Right.
it's covered with,
And
right?
and I've got, if you go online, or go look around, you'll find, there's all kinds of pictures of the tabernacle. All right. Um,
Yeah.
so this is one that I have. I don't know if anybody can see that. Take a screenshot. Um, but if you can see, right there is a basic layout. So you got the door, which would be over here, right? Then you got the altar, the laver, holy place, holy of holies. Okay, and then you have the outer court. All right, there's your visual. All right, so uh, so yeah, that's as high tech as we get. Uh, so the first thing being the door. All right, so what would be the door on, you know, for a person? Well, don't think of it as literal door, in like you're gonna cut your chest open, but it's when somebody approaches you, they're entering your door. They're getting into your space. They're getting into your area. All right. So there's your door. Now inside everybody is an altar. And you say, "Wow, that sounds freaky." Well, think about it. You will worship something, even if it's yourself. You will worship something, and you will sacrifice. You will sacrifice your life on that altar. We use the terms, you know. We even use terms like that. Uh, in our culture, we say things, but we don't realize the origin of it, right? Which is pretty common. It's kind of like uh, the truth of how truth is transferred from one person to another. Uh, you know, when I look at truth in you, or you look at truth in me that hasn't taken root yet, to me it looks like a flickering candle. In other words, I see some light, but I can't really. It's not producing a lot of light, just a little bit of light. But when the sun comes up in us, then we see the truth
Or
for
dawn.
ourselves, right? But we use the term all the time. Has it dawned on you? You mean it hadn't dawned on you yet? We, well, well, I'm hoping that it'll dawn on you one day. We use the term all the time, and what it means is, did the sun come up? Was truth illuminated to the point, you know, you may not be able to see real clear with a candle in the dark, but you can see pretty good. But when the sun comes up, it's undeniable, right?
What's that First Peter where the day star dawns in your heart? The
Yeah, I think it's
phosphorus idea.
Peter, maybe Second Peter. Uh, I guess I should be
That's
diligent.
just a that's a great. I might have it in the notes from earlier. Uh,
Uh,
no, we talked about First Peter was the living stones. I think it's in there where that's at. Uh,
yeah, Second Peter 1, um, 19,
Bingo.
which so we have a prophetic word made more sure, to which you would do well to pay attention, as to a lamp shining in a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. Basically, you're looking at truth. It looks just like something giving a little bit of light, but then whenever it dawns on you, in other words, a day star rises in your heart,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's good.
So, so you have an altar, all right? There is a laver. Now, what's really interesting about the laver is this, and you need to go back and study this. I could go into it, but it's, I don't want to talk about going on a rabbit trail. That trail is long and winding, so I don't want to. I don't. I'm just going to assume you know what the tabernacle is. Unfortunately, that's hard. Um, so when you get to the altar, there's a lot of detail. There's dimensions. There's what it's got to be made of. There's certain things about it. Qualities you got to have, aspects about it you got to have. Um, but when you get to the laver, it says it needs to be made of brass and have one. I mean, it's the lack of dimensions, the lack of detail it screams more than the detail. Okay, it's kind of like if I was really detailed about something, and all of a sudden I just said, I just have that. You'd be like, well, okay, wow, that's wow. It must not be. Either you're thinking it's not that important, or there's something else going on. So it's not that it's not important. The laver is very important, but what it means is, because the laver is basically the how the priests would cleanse themselves, and how they would wash. They would get water, because there's certain things that they needed water for uh, when preparing the sacrifice, or as it was being sacrificed. Um, so why does there lack of dimension with the laver? my personal opinion, I'd have no way of knowing this, other than this is just what it looks like to me, is that what it what it takes to bring you to cleanliness, what brings it's different for everybody. What would be effective for me would not be effective for you, and vice versa. So God gives us some freedom in that, and how we would cleanse, right? As far as what's gonna be the holder of the spirit. There's no bounds. How do you put a uh, how do you fit the Holy Spirit in a container, right? What dimensions would you need to 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 keep the Holy Spirit in a well? There are no dimensions. He's vast. So when you get to the temple, this thing was bigger than a lot of swimming pools. I mean, it was
Mm.
huge, right? In the Tabernacle of the Wilderness, it was you had to be able to move it. So it had to move, so you couldn't make it too big. You couldn't carry it. So the size was greatly reduced. So, but in each person, like some redemption, or not redemption, but cleanliness as a believer for some is different than others. So that's the thing. Is that too much or enough?
No, I was just thinking about the mikvahs. The
Yeah.
mikvahs, those the pools of um, I guess of cleansing, but baptism back in the
Yeah.
day, during that time. And was there a mikvah in the temple, or was it
Tabernacle.
outside the temple?
No, that's it. Wasn't necessarily mikvah, which for those of you that don't know what a mikvah is, it's just a place to baptize. It's a
Yeah.
thing big enough to put somebody in to baptize. Was it that big? I don't know. I mean, there's no dimensions. it's they use their own uh, perception to make it what they needed, because like there was on certain sacrifices had to be washed, so you need water for that. Then and remember they're in the middle of the desert. Okay, so this is no small task to fill this thing. So they needed water for that. They needed water to wash their clothes. There were certain clothes, certain things certain times they needed to wash their what they were wearing. Um, so the water had to come from that. Um, so was it big enough to bathe in? I don't know. I don't. I don't think so, but I could be wrong. Um, so there's the laver. Then you move to the main part of the tabernacle, and that is the holy place, which has uh, three components in it. It has the menorah, it has the table of showbread, and then it has the altar of incense. Okay, so the menorah obviously represents light, or truth, or not truth, but illumination, because that was the only light in there. Then you had the table of showbread, bread being truth, um, scripture. You could that encompasses quite a bit, right? So you've got this truth that needed to be rotated regularly. Then you had the altar of incense, which is representative prayer, and in Revelation, it very much recognizes incense being offered up, being the prayers of the saints, right? Um, so it definitely represents prayer. So again, we're talking about heaven, but we're also talking about you. So inside of you, there is light, there is bread, there is uh, prayer, right? And a lot of people say, well, you know, non believers don't have light. That's not what Jesus said. Jesus says, if the light in you be darkness, how great is that darkness? So, in other words, you can't have light. You can't have light that's dark. So, what's Jesus talking about? Was he off his meds that day? I mean, uh, so the light, the thing you follow, the thing that illuminates truth. So if you're using darkness to illuminate truth, you're in sad shape.
Well, and it goes back. I think he makes a good point later on where he talks about the Pharisees being blind guides,
Mm.
and you think about like what Jesus, of course, is. I think the fuel for that, if I'm remembering correctly, the fuel for that statement is directed toward the religious people that the people are looking around and thinking, well, if anybody's light, it's those guys.
Yeah.
And Jesus turns around and then even calls them blind guides. So there's the the idea of what we perceive naturally to be the people that are full of light. Jesus was saying the light that is in them is actually darkness.
Right.
It goes back to what you think you have
Right.
will be taken away.
Right.
It goes back to the whole I've not given you the eyes to see. I've not given you the ears to hear that.
Well, one of the great examples of that is in our culture that we can kind of grab a hold of is evolution. Okay, so you know, a lot of people say, Bill, you sound stupid when you say you don't believe in evolution because things change. Okay, I'm not talking about variation. I'm talking about evolution
Sure. Yeah.
where you are God's. You're taking God out of it, right? And it is something springing up out of nothing and becoming alive, right? Like we've observed that all the time. That happens every day. So, my God, you know, and that's a good example of using darkness to illuminate information, right? You can't you, if you you know if you kick God out of the whole creation and you say no, everything evolved, it doesn't matter what information I bring to you, you're going to examine it through the lens or the idea or the light of evolution, right? Because that's what you believe, that's your belief system, right? But for a believer that understands God created, and everybody says, "Oh, you believe God created in 6 days?" I'm like, I don't understand why it took him so long.
Because he had to rest on the seventh.
Well, I mean, does he really need to? I mean, there's other reasons beside that, right? Why he did what he did, and the pattern in which he did it. So, a lot of people think, oh, that's too short a time. I'm thinking, nah, that's really too long for God. I don't understand. I mean, he must have been having an off day. Maybe he just didn't have his latte that day. Uh, I'm picking on
No
lattes.
meds nor latte.
More lattes. All right. So you have so what you're looking at the holy place is the soul of a person, mind, will, and emotions. All right. And so then it's a trinity right in there. So but in every believer, you're gonna have light. You're gonna have prayer, right? But you're also gonna have bread, which is food only for the priest, right? And I won't get into what David did. When he ate the bread in there. I'm not gonna get off on that. But the point is the main reason for the bread being there was for the priest to eat. Okay. So there has to be a source. There has to be truth. There has to be some bread in you. Um, so that's the holy place. Then you have the Holy of Holies, which is where the Ark of the Covenant was, and it is a picture of where God resides. You have the mercy. You have the Ark of the Covenant. Then you have what's the mercy seat, it's actually two components. They're distinguished to be two different things. And the idea is that it's where the presence of God would reside, almost in an idea of Him sitting there, right? But then you had the angels that would look down on the mercy seat, and what was in what was in the ark, which you had Aaron's rod that budded, the manna, and then you had the the tablets, right, that Moses had, and each one of those is a picture of man's failure. All right, so you had the manna that they hated, and they hated God's provision. Um, Aaron's rod that budded was due out of they didn't like God's decisions, right? And then the law, tablets of the law, they didn't like God's rules, right? So it's all, and so you got these angels who protect the very holiness of God looking down on that, and if something's not put in between there, man's dead. He dies from his failures. So that's where the blood was applied. That's where the blood was sprinkled, to make atonement for man, to make that intercession. So when Jesus was crucified and died, it says the veil of the temple was rent from top to bottom. All right, it wasn't the outer veil; it was the inner veil. So now a believer in Christ, in what Jesus did, now the two rooms combined into make one. So now in the presence of God, now we pray. In the presence of God, now we have truth or bread. In the presence of God, now we see or we have light, right? So uh, the only and when that veil was rent, there was only one group of people that would even know that it was rent, other than the people that heard it, and that is the priesthood. We think we think people saw it on the outer court. No, now that it would have made a heck of a sound, but they would have
Well,
never known.
and think about in simple illustration terminology what God is actually inviting to take place now.
Mm.
Like with the veil being torn,
Yeah,
what's the appropriate answer to that is what we've been talking about, which is I'm inviting you now all to be kingdom of priests.
yeah.
not just the select not just the select group
Mm.
that are of the tribe of Levi, but anybody that will come can now go into that boldly.
Well,
Yeah.
if you're a believer, you're a priest. Bingo.
Yeah.
So if you're a believer, you have access to this. Okay, you don't need to do anything ritually. Okay, because this is contained in you. Remember, we said this is us. So in you is all these things. So now there's no separation. Just like in when Jesus was walking around with those knuckleheads, there was a veil that was covered, which separated their soul, their shuke, from their spirit, or from the spirit of God. They couldn't come in contact, because before Jesus redeemed us, if God comes in contact, I mean, His justice says we must die, right? There can't be a full union, but after, now there's a full union. Uh, so we're much better advantaged than they were. That's why when the Spirit came, things changed radically, for the early believers, because all that changed. It was a big change. So you have all these things that are happening inside that become useful. But what's really, really interesting about the whole, what we're going to be talking about are the five main offerings. Out of all five offerings, only one out of five enter into the holy place. We think, I assume, we think that with these offerings, that blood goes in there all the time. But there was only one time a year when anything went into that Holy Holies, and that was the Day of Atonement, and that was only the high priest. So a daily ministering priest would never even go in there except for one offering. And, we use that as a teaser maybe.
Yeah.
One offering. So that means, why am I saying that? Is because when you look at the tabernacle being us, so you can't see my soul, you can't see my spirit, which would be contained, just like if you were looking at the tabernacle and you were looking at this tent, you see the tent, but you can't look into the tent, right? And you don't have the right to go into that tent. So you can't go in, so a normal physical person can't go into there to see. All they can see is what's on the outside, right? So same thing here. You can only see what's on the outside. You can't observe what's going on in my mind. We wish we could do that, but I think if we could, it wouldn't work out like we think it would. But to hear other people's thoughts, to understand their what they're thinking at that time. But the point is, so that means all the offerings, mainly all the offerings, happen in the tabernacle court, the majority of them, right? So that means that these are for the physical now. These are these are applicable for the uh, not just inward, but this is outward. This is observable. Is I guess what I'm trying to say. But the tabernacle is the place where the priest works, operates. So you being a priest, where are you going to operate in is in your tabernacle, right? You got everything, all the components to do your job. They're already contained in you. The question is what kind of condition they're in. So when you go look into the the duties of a priest, what's he supposed to do? Well, he needs to change the water in the laver, or he needs to make sure there's water in the laver. He needs to make sure there's fire on the altar. He needs to make sure there's bread on the table of showbread. He needs to make sure there's light trimming. Make sure there's oil. So you got fire. In on the altar of incense on the altar. You take coals from the altar. So if there's no fire on the altar, then you can't do sacrifices, right? There's no presence of God. And if there's no presence of God on the altar, then that's where they got the coals to put them on the altar of incense. So if there's no fire, if there's no presence of God on the altar to do sacrifice, then there's not going to be any prayer because they feed off
Got
each
to
other.
get wood too.
There's wood. What's wood? There's all kinds of symbols. What's wood a symbol of? Humanity. It's a symbol of people, right? Um, there's all kinds of examples. Well, not all kinds, but there's a few examples where you can point to that
You got
point.
to crush olives to get the oil.
Yeah, exactly. There's a
I
lot
mean,
of
the depth of the responsibility is beyond even the perception
yeah.
of the responsibility.
But then you get into like you just said the oil that they would get from olives. There's three pressings of olives. When they had olives, there's three pressings, and each one of the pressings produce different types of oil for different uses. And it's important to know which pressing you get the oil for the menorah and which one you would normally use. It's not the same.
Yeah,
Isn't it crazy?
yeah.
It's insane. So
The, the
so there's
details are
huh?
the details are
Oh man.
almost endless.
Yes. Yes. You're never going to get to the bottom. Just go ahead and kind of cuddle up to the idea that you're just never going to get to the bottom of every bit of the detail because there's so much there. So that's why I'm not really taking so much time. If you really want to get something that's going to be beneficial, study the tabernacle. Look at all the detail. Get you a expert textbook that'll tell you all the detail, and just understand that everything it tells you about the tabernacle is telling you about what heaven's like, but it's also telling you about what Jesus the Christ was like, and it's also telling you who you are. It's telling you what you're like. So you're a priest operating in your tabernacle. You need to make sure that on a daily basis that there's presence of God there, the hot fire, right? There's something there for it to consume, right? And guess what? You get to be the one consumed. So
Skippy fatal fun.
oh man, there's so many symbols in this whole thing about uh, you know you either being burned, consumed, you know, all kinds of stuff, man, and that will. I mean, a lot of people trying to make themselves feel better about themselves. This won't do that. You will feel better about yourself in a way, but it's not going to be by, hey, you're great, you're fantastic, yay, you. No.
Well, the only way, and the only time I would even say this, that you even come remotely close to feeling good about yourself,
Yeah.
is when somebody shows up and you know what to do.
Yes. Yes.
That's the point of the the that's the point of this, where it's not like, ooh, I get to be a better Christian. That has nothing to do with this.
Mm.
Are you trying to be a better Christian just so people will applaud you and think that you are something that maybe you're not? I mean, the point of the tabernacle is not to be a better Christian,
Right.
although you might become better
Yeah.
at being Christ-like,
Yeah.
because of course we don't even like the word Christian, but at the same time, this is a ministry set up to teach you how to best represent the heart of God to the person that
Right.
shows up to your door. And as we've said often, who's knocking on your door,
Right.
ready to present
Right.
an offering of, going back to the five offerings.
Right.
and
You,
and like, I mean, you and I we had just gone through the Kings. We had spent almost a year, literally almost every week. We spent almost a year going through the Kings, touching on priesthood, which we had already gone through that. But then Marty comes along, and he is the best representation of anybody I've ever had show up in my life for 20 plus years of not just ministry but disciple making.
mm-hmm.
Um, and he's the best representation ever. It's like God literally said, I'm going to show you how this works. And then, it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and it's like, ooh, God, what do I get to do with this guy? It's
Right.
then the responsibility changes, because somebody's just shown up vulnerable.
Yeah.
Somebody's shown up that's literally had they've allowed their insides to be opened, and then you're looking at it and you're like, dude, are you really sure you're ready for this?
Yeah.
And then I hand him the knife.
Yeah.
Handing him the knife. Dismember your body yourself, buddy. I'm gonna step back and watch, but I'll help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Um, I don't think that you're gonna feel. There's no way to feel more gratified as a believer, because then everything that you're doing, everything that we tell people to do to make themselves feel better about being a believer, they think it's for them, but actually these actions, making sure all the things I've described as far as what we need, components we need to have ready, are not for you. They're for somebody else. It's outside of you. So it's those things become just tools, not the point. It's like having a priest. Can you imagine Moses and Aaron and all the priests at that time getting the tabernacle ready, having it all, have everything ready to go, and then they looked at the people that were standing out at the gate, ready to worship God, and they would say, we would let you in, but you'll just mess it up. We want to we want to make sure that this stays. We want to make sure this stays the way it is. We want to make sure it stays pristine. We don't want you coming in here tromping around. If we do this or that, it's gonna, we're gonna have to use water. We don't want to get, that's everything looks really good right now. So please don't come in. That would have been completely asinine.
Yeah. And you say that, and I immediately think of Obed Edom before David
Yeah,
the gets the Ark of the Covenant out of the hands of the Philistines. You've got Uzzah that's killed by the presence of just trying to like save the ark from falling off of the cart, and then everybody steps back and is like, let's go put it over here in this pagan's house and see how well they do. And then it might have been Paul White or somebody talked about how he could envision the little kids of Obed Edom in his house jumping and playing all over this ark and touching it, and they're not dying. And it's like this beautiful picture of the heart of God toward the Gentile nation to
yeah,
come in to his presence. And like what we're saying is, you know, you don't have to be perfect to walk in to this role. The point of perfection's already been it's already been impacted
yeah,
by Jesus's life.
right.
And because Jesus walked in on our behalf and did what he did, now we can even handle this and handle it wrong.
Yeah. Well, you're going
Like
to.
we can
Yeah.
we're gonna mess it up.
Sure.
We're gonna screw up an offer that
Right.
shows up and knocks on our. We're gonna mess up relationships because at the same time we're trying to learn how to do it. So knock yourself out,
Yeah.
baby.
Yeah. And when you say that, it brings me back to whenever they erected this tabernacle and they started, Moses began the sacrifices with Aaron. They screwed up. They screwed up. One of the offerings that they did, and Moses is like, "What'd you do?" And Aaron was like, uh, well, we kind of did it. We kind of messed up." And Moses is like, "Oh snap!
Yeah,
We in trouble. We in trouble." And Aaron goes, "Yeah, but didn't we do a sin offering for ourselves for mess ups?" And Moses went, "Oh yeah, we're cool."
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So even in the beginning, the very as the starting gun went off, they went blah. They busted their face. So if you think, well, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to, well, it ain't gonna happen any other way. You're gonna have to make a mistake. Um,
get over yourself.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You're important, but you're not as important as you think you are. So
Yeah,
yeah. So
good.
looking at the tabernacle, understanding that this is us, understanding that people are going to come to us, and they already do. I mean, they already come to us all the time. We just don't know how to act. We just
That's
don't know
right.
what the procedure is. We don't know what the step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. We don't get that part, and that's hopefully we can get there. And do yourself a favor if you're listening to this. Do yourself a huge favor. Study the tabernacle. At least get the main components down. You don't have to get every little detail. I mean, there's four. There's three coverings on the top. Um, uh, Gosh, there's so much detail in the assembly of the holy place and the holy of holies. Um, and there's truth in it. There's good. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. But at least get to the understanding of the components, the altar, the laver, the three elements in the holy place and the holy of holies with the ark, and then you have a border, right? And something that you said earlier about people may not feel qualified. You have been reckoned so. You have been deemed so. Um, the priests would dress in white linen. They were they were given the picture of you were qualified. And linen, understand linen of that time was a kingly was a kingly garment. Everybody was wearing wool except for kings. They would wear linen. So the fact that we wear linen all the time, we don't think 2 seconds about it. All right, and we don't
Yeah.
even understand it's a kingly garment. So
Yeah, and I would even say going back to some good sources, you can go on YouTube. The Tabernacle
oh yeah,
Man is a good place to start. He kind of reenacts a lot of the stuff. I've gotten a lot of information from him. Lord, there's all kinds of documentaries on this reenactment of what the priesthood looked like in the tabernacle,
mm-hmm.
and of course they set it up in the temple as well. But the Tabernacle Man's a good place to start, and there's a you probably click on that on YouTube, and you're going to find all
Oh
kinds
yeah,
of other information that's represented. Of course, you got to like take what you were teaching and what we know to be the information handed to us, given to us that we found ourselves.
mm-hmm.
And there's going to be people that have a little different flavor
Yeah,
with the tabernacle because ours is a little more unique at times with it connecting with disciple making,
yeah,
where some others will connect it to hierarchy,
yeah,
like the literal pastor is the man.
yeah,
Right, and then write that crap off
yeah.
because that's just
Right.
bull
So,
malarkey. But
and you bring up a good point, and we need to say this. Okay, we need to say this so that
it's
everybody
our
understands.
disclaimer.
Huh?
It's our disclaimer.
Mm, maybe I don't know, but basically, I want to just spell what because I'm not I'm there's certain things that we have to shut off in our brain so we can think like trying to understand what somebody that had never heard any of this stuff, what would they be thinking about? And that is, there's only two offices in the whole of priesthood, and that is the high priest and the regular, and then everybody else. So there is no step. Now, are there some priests that are going to be more experienced than others? Sure, that kind of makes a pecking order, but it doesn't make one better than the other, right?
Yeah.
Just like the fact that we know some of this information doesn't make us better than somebody that doesn't know it. It just makes we're different, and obviously I have to take a position of guide, teacher, but it doesn't make me better. It doesn't mean that God goes, oh yeah, this guy's higher than this guy. No, we're equal. We're just in different places.
Well, it's kind of like I just had this thought. It might be right or wrong, but it's like sighting in a rifle
Mm-hmm.
with a scope.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are going to be aiming, and their aim's going to be a little bit off,
Mm-hmm.
but others are more precise because they've adjusted, they've made improvements, they've shot a number of times and
Right.
missed, and because of that, their aim is better.
Yeah.
And I think that's the idea of you and I in the priesthood compared to somebody else.
Yes.
It's not that we're better, but we have and should have because we've missed so often.
Yeah.
Our aim should be a little better
Right.
because of our failure,
Right.
our wrestling, our adjustments that we've made.
Right.
So it really doesn't make us better; it just makes us a little more precise
Yeah.
in the process of
Well,
ministering
that's a
to
great.
people.
That's a
That
great way to put it.
yeah, we know, hey, this is probably what's wrong with this guy, or
Right.
this is where he's at. This is what hand him a knife, hand him a grenade, or he needs a hug, or he just whatever it is, it goes back to experience.
Right. Yeah.
We
And
have experience with this
I
truth.
like the analogy of shooting. Scope. Dialing in a scope. You got to fire it. You got to fire it to know where you are.
Yeah, they bore sight scopes. My boy just bought one he got a gun for Christmas and then bought a scope. And I said, chances of it being bore sighted, which they factory bore sight,
Uh-huh.
and try to get it as much as close to when you shoot, it will probably be on
Yeah.
paper.
Yeah.
But then you've got to adjust. And I told him, I said, you need a big backdrop because the bore sight to some people is it's 2 foot within the range of bullseye. Other bore sights can literally, some scopes literally get it like 2 to 5 inches in
Oh,
diameter.
wow.
So his was like this, but then as he's adjusting the scope, and I was at the house and I kept hearing him shoot, and I'm like, I thought you had that thing sighted in. Well, what he didn't realize is the scope was in mils and not inches. So it was millimeters, or it's a different way because the
Yeah.
scope is a different scope. And so he's adjusting it, thinking he's moving a quarter of an inch, and he's literally moving like 3 inches to 6 inches down. And he's all over the paper because you know why? He didn't read the instructions on the scope.
Oh, wow.
He assumed. Great analogy.
Great
He
picture.
assumed
Yeah.
he assumed that site was like all the others.
Mm-hmm.
But once I came up there, I literally had to go up there because he kept hammering the shots. And I'm like, he's gonna be out of 25 shells in no time, and them things are about $50 for a case. Ammunition's nuts.
Yeah.
So I ended up going up there, and I'm like, dude, this is in mils. This isn't in inches. I said, you've been adjusting this the wrong way. So we went back in like 2 shots. Boom, he had it. But that's a good
Yeah.
example
That's great.
of like you take me. I was like Hunter a couple years ago where I was trying it. I was shooting. But I was missing. And then I had people like you and Dillingham and White Boy to come along
Yeah.
and, hey man, you
Yeah.
need to adjust this a little. You're going too much here, too
Yeah.
much there. And the priesthood is a beautiful picture of family.
Sure.
Once you get in and you start to see it more clearly, it's team, man. It's a beautiful picture of team.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
one of the things I truly love about that.
Yeah. That there is some play, and we'll get into that where, depending on what sacrifice you may need, you're gonna need help. You can't do this alone. There's no lone ranger priest out there. It's a definitely a group effort because, um, well, I'm getting ahead of
Yeah, let a
myself, but
bull show up and
well,
see how long it takes you to
yeah,
handle that thing.
there's that, and then there's courses, you know, the priest in their courses. Um,
We've
there's
been through them.
yeah, yeah, there's and that, yeah,
Hallelujah. Thank you for the seasons of that,
yeah,
though, because I look back and I'm like, what the heck's wrong with me?
yeah,
Why is nobody showing up?
right,
Why am I sitting here twiddling my thumbs? And it's like, ah,
uh,
okay,
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, say, and we're having a conversation that somebody that doesn't know what the priesthood is, that they have no idea what we're talking about. But it's just the idea of, it brings peace, it brings direction, it brings focus, and it
Yeah.
brings explanation to where you are. A lot of people say, well, why is this happening? Well, why is that happening? Well, why does he get to do something and I don't get to do something? Why is somebody else so active and I'm not active? Well, if you understand the priesthood, you get it. You understand. So, anyway. So,
That's good stuff, man. That last 30 to 40 minutes is, I wish we could erase the first 15 when we're
why?
looking for our crap. And I'm still trying to get awake, still trying to awaken myself out of my slumber
Ah,
and take that last 40 to 45 minutes and just,
nah. Nah, 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 nah.
but it's raw and real,
No,
baby.
man.
Raw and real.
No, it's fine.
That's
We're
good, though.
all right, man. Well, we will
You can
get
tell
back
we ain't been
together.
together in a while.
Yeah, we'll pick this back up, and we'll start talking a little bit about the daily duties. We'll finish up Tabernacle and see how we do. All right.
Okay. Awesome, man. Thanks, Bill.
See.